Hello, my name is Math-Caireen. I'm a learning coach with the Toronto District School Board. I'm presenting today on behalf of myself and my colleagues, Trisha Nurse and Cristina Guerrero. Today we'll be talking about inquiry-based learning in secondary mathematics, connections to equity and well-being. First, the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We recognize that this is an asynchronous session. However, if you wish to pause for a moment and complete the minds on, we have 3 questions to think about. In what ways do you respond to student voice, input, and lived experience through your lesson and/or course planning? Do you have the experience of supporting students in developing or articulating an inquiry problem or process in the mathematics classroom? And how have you promoted deep thinking about big ideas such as variable and relationship? Our agenda today will be to start with an introduction to the TDSB Math Equity Toolkit, then take a brief look at inquiry-based learning, what it is and what it is not, make connections between IBL, inquiry-based learning, and equity, and then look at student voice and meaningful IBL, provide some guiding questions for secondary mathematics. Here is a copy of the TDSB Math Equity Toolkit. It is available online. I'll leave this here for a moment. Highlights include an equitable anti-oppressive stance, building on student capacity, providing entry points for all learners, using student ideas to inform next steps, providing a positive reflection of students' lived experiences, and making tasks accessible to learners in their homes. Some questions that we might consider that reflect the key points of the Equity Toolkit. Who are my students? What matters to them? What are their lived realities? How do I create instructional space to build connection? How do I get input from students in a way that is equitable? How do I support my students in creating an inquiry question that is meaningful to them and that promotes deep understanding of big ideas in the curriculum? How do I guide rather than direct this process? And what do my students want to know about? Do I feel comfortable co-constructing a problem that has the potential to evolve with new information? Can I be flexible? Particularly key right now is how will I support the well-being of my students and provide space to talk about issues which are prominent for them, which could include anti-Black violence, COVID-19, food insecurity, loss of a family member, job loss. So we'll pause for a moment to take a quick look at inquiry-based learning, because we've considered the Equity Toolkit, and we are going to be talking about inquiry-based learning today. But we do need to be more explicit about how the two are connected. So inquiry-based learning is a pedagogical approach that places students' questions, ideas, and observations at the center of learning. It requires that educators play an active role in creating that learning community where ideas will be challenged, tested, refined, discussed, improved upon. And it does go deep with curriculum big ideas. There are misconceptions about inquiry-based learning, and what it is not is letting go of the class and allowing students to self-direct all aspects of their learning. We do ask questions and provide guidance. Learning goals and success criteria are still explicitly communicated, and instruction is still required for specific curriculum expectations. We do know that deep learning to a high standard occurs when cognitive processes associated with IBL are activated. Students who are supported in formulating and investigating questions about the conditions of their own lived realities, particularly through lenses of social justice and community building, are more likely to be engaged and effective learners. Zaretta Hammett says that drawing from students' existing funds of knowledge builds brain power. If we look more closely at the Math Equity Toolkit, we do see these explicit connections to IBL. With student ideas informing next steps, we recognize that student voice, input, and questions shape inquiry questions, inquiry process, and even assessments. If we say that positive reflection of students' lived experiences must be a component, well, we also know that inquiry questions are articulated in response to students' concerns, interests, and wonderings. And if tasks are accessible to learners in their homes, then this is learning that can be collaborative, be readily supported by a family member, and it should be something that can happen with materials that are readily available and learning accessible to all. If we want to get more specific about mathematics, here are 4 pillars of IBL in mathematics, and we see that they're a very close fit with the key points in the Math Equity Toolkit. So if we're developing tasks for secondary mathematics, we need to look at some guiding questions. We know that students are empowered when they are supported in articulating math questions that connect meaningfully to their lives and to the curriculum. So in order to get student voice contributions, these can be supported formally, so through focus groups or surveys, or informally, for example, through making instructional space and norms in the classroom for conversations and collaboration. Before we look at some guiding questions, I just wanted to provide some examples of ideas and concerns that were voiced by students in grades 9 and 10 classes, and this is prior to the shutdown. Inconsistent crowded transit in their neighborhood, wanting better access to green pea bicycle rental, not enough paths for biking and walking through their neighborhood, walking younger siblings to school in different locations, wondering how to get on track to go to university, wondering how to get a lunch program for students at a school. If you like, take a moment to challenge yourself with the following guiding questions. How would you move the conversation toward articulating a mathematical inquiry problem that connects one of these ideas directly to the curriculum? How would you ensure that the problem is a positive, capacity-based reflection of students in their communities? How would you ensure that the appropriate conceptual and procedural foundations are in place by the early stages of the inquiry process? And how would you flexibly prepare yourself for contingencies, for an inquiry question or procedure to evolve, for unexpected results? As we've seen, students are empowered when they are supported in developing procedures for investigating math concepts that are accessible in their homes. Tasks are most accessible when students can create a plan using readily available materials, and when the plan can be discussed with a family member. Imagine, for example, you challenge students to create a model of periodic motion using materials in their home. Take a moment. What student thinking would you anticipate? What guiding questions would you provide for students to support self-reflection and collaborative reflection? And how can you ensure that your task is accessible to all students, regardless of access to technology? So as mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this is really just an introduction to the Math Equity Toolkit, its connections to IBL, and some possible guiding questions around incorporating IBL in the classroom. We do encourage you to watch the other videos around project-based learning that are available for some more specific examples. As we leave, I just want to leave you with an image of some materials that could be accessible in the home that might be useful for this task. Part of the inquiry process would be students developing a procedure Thank you very much for attending this session today. Here are some resources to get started with the idea of IBL and math teaching.